In ranking the FromSoft bosses, I guess it only makes sense to start with Demon Souls, which means first up would be the Vanguard Demon. Um, I'm gonna go just C tier. It's just an average boss. I mean, average mechanics. It's got the butt smash. It has some good swipes, and there's really all to say about it. It's got a cool design, I think. It's pretty intimidating for the first boss that you fight, literally the first, and it's really all there is to it. Next would be Phalanx, and I think that's gonna be an E tier. You know, most Demon Souls bosses have some type of weakness, like you would see in old types of video games, a weakness or a gimmick. And, you know, Phalanx itself actually doesn't do any attacks or damage, it's only the minions. And I don't necessarily have a problem with minions in a boss fight. The problem with Phalanx is there's a lot of them. And one thing I don't like is how you can't attack them from the front. I understand that's the whole point of like the Phalanx shield formation. The problem is that when you have that many enemies, that many minions around, you're already thinking about positioning. Positioning is the number one thing. And so when you can't even attack them from the front, that kind of makes the position, finding the right positioning to get some attacks off, tedious and annoying. And so maybe it would be better if they didn't have their shield when they were off of the boss, but that's how it's set up. So I'm not really a fan of that. I'm gonna go E tier. The red and blue dragon are both gonna be F minus. I mean, are they even bosses is kind of a question. They do drop a soul, but I mean, just sitting there and mashing the R1 on the Erdtree button on your bow and arrow is not fun. Armor Spider. I'm gonna go D tier. So the Armor Spider has a lot of get off me moves, and I'm not necessarily opposed to get off me moves. The problem with the Armor Spider is that when it throws out the flame, you have to run so far back and like wait for a very long time. And then you're dodging a bunch of fireballs on the way in, and then you can resume with the fight. And I just don't think it's a good balance of offense to defense, and that's something that we'll get into with many of the FromSoft bosses, is that I think a lot of times when you have a less than average boss, the biggest problem is the balance of offense and defense. And I think ideally the amount of time you spend on offense and defense, avoiding damage and dealing damage, is going to be 50-50. With the Armor Spider, it's not like that. You spend a lot of time avoiding damage, you get a couple hits in, and then you have to run away. And so I'm not really a fan of that. But I do think at times it is a fun fight. When you are in close, it is kind of fun. It does require some good dodge rolling, and not many Demon Souls bosses or even Dark Souls 1 bosses require that, but this one does. And I'll go with D tier. I think it's a fun fight when you're up close, but you just get pushed away so often that I can't give it. It has to be below average. Next is the Fool's Idol, and I'm gonna go probably a C tier for Fool's Idol. The Fool's Idol is the first of many bosses that shoot ranged spell attacks at you and clone themselves and duplicate themselves. This trope is used many times throughout Dark Souls, and this is the first iteration of it. And I think this is one of the better iterations of it. I think it's pretty interesting. The way that you tell the real one is like the particle effects and how it's larger magic. And I think it's also pretty cool having all of the magical traps set around the arena. I think the magical traps add something to the arena as well, because there's a lot of cover, and there should be. When you're gonna have many like boss or many enemies, especially with ranged attacks, surrounding you or surrounding the arena, there needs to be cover for you to avoid those attacks, especially the ones you can't see. But while you're in cover, you don't then want there to just be no threat, and so the threat becomes avoiding the magical traps. And so I think it's a cool, interesting balance. It's like the mini enemies is balanced by the magical traps. The lack of melee prowess of the Fool's Idol is balanced by like the duplication, and then the good cover that you get is balanced by the magical mines. And so I think everything is pretty well balanced in the Fool's Idol. I don't like that it can respawn indefinitely if you don't kill the guy up top, but it's really not a big deal. It's not a very difficult boss. So I'm gonna go C tier. I can't give it any higher than C because once you get up close to it, it is just a pinata. But I think it's a decent boss. The Adjudicator, I have to go E or maybe even F. I mean, he's kind of like the Covetous Demon, not just because he's fat, but he doesn't, like, there's no threat. He doesn't pose any threat to the player, like, especially once you get down there. I think when you're on the staircase, if I remember correctly, he has some type of ranged attack which can get you. But once you're down low, his attacks come out so slowly that it's like dodging them or avoiding them is a complete joke. And yeah, he's got the weakness is that he has a wound, and the wound is the only thing that you can deal damage to. But the weakness might not, like, the gimmick might as well not even be there, because he attacks so slowly that getting that positioning yourself by his open wound is not even a challenge. And so there might as well not be a gimmick because it's so easy to exploit. Honestly, he's gonna be F. I don't know why. Like, I don't really like anything about it. The visual design is nice. I think the arena is kind of cool with the staircase. Other than that, it's another pinata. You know, you just hit it. Leechmonger. Really, I don't really like anything about Leechmonger. I guess the idea is kind of cool. Like, a boss is made up of a bunch of smaller parts, and I think if I remember correctly, like, some of the individual leeches can come after you, kind of similar to the Centipede Demon. But other than that, I mean, I think he's got a couple like whirly arm attacks. I think when I fought this boss, I didn't even get hit. I fought it on I've only played the PS3 version, by the way. I have not played the PS5 remake. I'll probably go F tier for Leechmonger. It's just not engaging at all. Like, Phalanx is still a little bit engaging because I'm still like getting in and getting my hits and then waiting for the minions and then going out. Like, I have to monitor the minions getting me versus my openings. Like, there's something to keep track of there. The Adjudicator and the Leechmonger, you just walk up and hit it, and that's all there is to it. So, Tower Knight. This is gonna be the first good boss of Demon Souls. I'm gonna go B tier. It's a good boss, and it's so interesting seeing the evolution of giants throughout FromSoft, because the Tower Knight was like the first giant, and then you have Dark Souls 1. Do you have any giants? You do have some giants in Dark Souls 1. They're not bosses though. And then Dark Souls 2, you have the last giant, who's a little bit bigger. Dark Souls 3, you have Yorm, who's like, I thought Yorm was huge. And then we get to eventually to Elden Ring and the Fire Giant. I mean, it's just crazy how the Tower Knight was so big that the gimmick was that you could only hit his ankles. And yet the Tower Knight only measures up to the Fire Giant's ankles. Very similar to Fire Giant, but done way better. The only complaint I have with Tower Knight is that sometimes if you get him backed up against the wall, that can be kind of annoying, because at least for me, I found the most comfortable strategy was to go after go after the ankles, and then keep running outwards. But I think it's a good fight. I think, it's a lot of like very simple moves. I mean, it's Demon Souls. It's a lot of simple moves, a lot of big slams with the shield and stuff like that. So I'm gonna go B tier. There's really not much about dodging or blocking. It's all about positioning. You kind of just avoid the attacks by walking around, but it's still engaging. It's still fun. The arena's cool. It's a good boss. Flame Lurker, though, is a really good boss. And I'm going to go A tier for Flame Lurker. I think Flame Lurker is the most aggressive boss in Demon Souls. Maybe the most fun, just mechanically speaking. The lore is kind of lame. He's just like, he just protects the dragon. But he's visually really cool. The aggression is really fun. He's probably the most difficult boss for my money. I actually beat him first try, but I still I think I ran out of grass, or at least I used all of my like half moon grass or something. And I think Flame Lurker is really fun. He's a very good challenge, and he's just a perfect like fight for what he is. So I'm gonna go A tier. Man eaters. I like the man eaters. Some people don't, but yeah, I can see the two issues with it is that they fly around a lot. That's annoying, and the arena is a very thin bridge. I don't really mind it, honestly. I think because the Demon Souls bosses are so easy generally, that having a boss that's difficult, even if the difficulty doesn't feel totally fair with the tiny bridge and the charge attacks, at least adds a sort of tension that you don't get with the other bosses. And so I'm gonna go probably B tier for Maneater. I think it's a slightly above average boss, and it is the first, just like Fool's Idol is the first of many duplicating sorcerers. The Maneater is the first of many dual gargoyle fights. For some reason, FromSoft just loves to throw multiple gargoyles at you. Next, we have the Old Hero, who I'm gonna go A tier. I really like the Old Hero. You can approach the fight in many ways, and which keeps things fresh on repeat playthroughs, and that adds a lot of points for me when you can approach it multiple ways. The biggest two ways that you can do it is, if you can do the strategy of exploiting the blindness of the Old Hero and actually staying still until he kind of creeps near you and then running away and then repeat the process, or you can just fight him straight up as if he isn't blind and just dodge his attacks well, and that's a valid strategy as well. He also has a magical damage on his sword, which means you can't really block his attacks, so you have to dodge roll. And I think that works really well with his attack moveset. He's got a really big sword that is satisfying to dodge. So you can like ignore the blindness, you can exploit the blindness, or you can even have the ring, which makes you quiet, which makes the boss a complete pushover. But I like when exploration and like reading item descriptions and solid exploration is rewarded in boss fights. And the Old Hero is an example of that, where if you have the ring and if you read it and if you put 2 and 2 together, you can significantly alter the mechanics of the fight, and I think that's really fun. Dirty Colossus. You know, Dirty Colossus is poopy, literally. The lore is just nothing. The aura is nothing. The visual design is not really that good. I guess it's kind of good for what he is. He is literally just a colossus of filth, you know? As far as all of the intangibles, like the design and the music and the arena and the atmosphere and the build-up, he gets a 0. But as far as the mechanics, I think the moveset and the mechanics of the fight are actually kind of decent. Like, pretty similar to Vanguard Demon in terms of quality. So, I'm going to go C tier. Honestly. I think he's just an average boss. He's not impressive in any way, but I don't find him offensive. I think he's relatively satisfying to fight because he's got a solid moveset. It's very basic and predictable and just arm swings and stuff, but I think it's an okay fight. Oh, I think he also has like a primitive form of armor, doesn't he? That you can break. So I think it's an okay fight. Penetrator, that's also going to be A tier for me. Penetrator, it seems like, is the blueprint for sword fights going forward in the FromSoft games. You can see the influence of the Penetrator in Artorias, in Lost Sinner and Velstadt and Fume Knight and even in Pontiff. Like, the Penetrator, a lot of people think that there are too many guys in armor fights, but I think a lot of times those are the best fights, and the Penetrator is the first example of that, where he's really just a guy in armor, but the moveset is so smooth, the visual design's awesome, the arena's fun. I love this fight. A tier. Dragon God. I want to give him some points for having cool lore and a cool visual design, but that lore and visual design is kind of wasted in the type of fight that it is. And so running around and just hitting switches, pulling levers is basically what it is. I'm gonna go F. Sorry, Dragon God. The greatest, missed potential maybe in the whole franchise. The Old Monk is just an NPC, really. I played on PS3, I didn't play online. He's just an NPC. He's just a regular enemy. So, F tier, I guess. Storm King. Kind of similar to Phalanx. The real fight, I think, a lot of times is with the minions. But I find the minions with Storm King to be a little more annoying than Phalanx. However, the main fight with the main enemy is a lot more fun because at least the main boss actually attacks you. It's also pretty cinematic and cool looking. It's just annoying to have to evade attacks that come from the sky. It's either a high D or a low E. It's better than Phalanx. Not as good as Armor Spider. Maybe about as good as Armor Spider. I'll go D tier for Storm King. Maiden Estrella also is technically an NPC fight like the Old Monk, but the NPC is very powerful. Her guardian, whose name I forget. I'm gonna go at least a C, maybe a B tier. I think she's a good fight. I think you can exploit it because it's an NPC, but she's got a lot of uniqueness to her. The whole, like, she's, you fight the guardian, kill the guardian, and then she will kill herself, which it just adds the uniqueness, adds a personality to her, to where I think the mechanics are like average, but there's like that X factor that just kind of gives her one tier above for me. Old King Allant, I'm gonna go S tier. I love Old King Allant. It's a very solid sword fight like Penetrator, Old Hero, and the lore is great, and the build-up is great, and the music is great, at least on the PS3. They changed it for the PS5. I prefer the PS3 track. He's got a really fun moveset. It's a great scene. The elevator ride sucks, but I love the fight. Good fight, great fight. S tier for me. And then True King Allant, he accomplishes what he is what he's supposed to be. But it's just that what he's supposed to be isn't that good. And so I'm not going to go F tier. I'll go E tier. Because his only purpose is to fulfill the narrative. He's not anything mechanically. However, he does fulfill the narrative really well. He does fulfill the lore really well. And he fits the moment. So I'll give him an E tier. So we'll submit that. 20. An even 20. And we can look at the analysis real quick. So no S pluses. We got 2 F minuses. Old King Allant standing at the top, followed by Flame Lurker, Old Hero, and the Penetrator in A tier. Overall distribution, not too surprised. We got a bottom heavy distribution for Demon Souls. That'll change, I think, as we get to the later games, but I think it's going to stay like this for a while through Dark Souls and Dark Souls 2. I think those first 3 games have a pretty weak boss lineup compared to the rest of the games. quality by game. Average ranking for Demon Souls ends up at a D. Let's see, what do we like? Single enemy fights are rated more highly than multi-enemy fights. That doesn't surprise me, right? Phalanx, Storm King, not as fun. Single enemy fights, that makes more sense. DLC, we don't have any DLC with Demon Souls. And then humanoid, I rating humanoid boss as a lot better than non-humanoid. Interesting. I guess if we look at it, yeah, the dragons kind of weigh that down a lot, I bet. And then we got like these four right at the top, so not a surprise. We will see how this changes. Next up is Dark Souls.